Hello everyone, welcome to the stream. Thanks a lot for joining us. So today we have released a new set of materials, and these are going to be a new set of sportswear textile materials that we launched on Substance Source. And so we did a blog post earlier today to communicate this, and like I said, all of the materials are now live on Substance Source and ready to be downloaded. So what we wanted to do in today's stream was, just walk through the process of how we prepare these textile scans for Substance Source. And I just want to show you how to use the scan processing filters here in Designer. And like I said, just show that process. So we have 30 new materials, and all of these materials were scanned and processed using Designer. And so I don't want to make light of all the hard work that the Substance Source team does. So what we're going to do today is just show kind of a basic demo. But like I said, I don't want to make light of all of the work that they put into it. But yeah, this basic demo is really going to showcase what I think is a lot of the strength of Substance Designer, being that, as you'll see, the process is pretty straightforward and allows you to create a full tileable material pretty quickly without a lot of trouble. So again, it's like I said, I think it really speaks to the overall design of Substance Designer and these new scan processing filters that we shipped. Okay, so like I said, let's see. For the first thing that we want to do here is I'm going to jump over here into Designer. And I think what we'll do first is kind of maybe just showcase some of these substances that we have here in Source. So let me just drag over here a browser window. So be just a second here. Let me grab something. So I'm just going to bring this browser window here into view. And so here's Substance Source, and what we're going to do is we'll just navigate here to our free assets, and just going to give you an idea of what some of these new fabrics look like here. So like I said, you can just log in, start to download these now. Everything is live, and so here are these sportswear textiles that we're going to be talking about here. And so, like I said, there's going to be 30 of these materials. Today, we're actually going to take a look at this one here. Oops, nope, that's the wrong one. It's, let me scroll down. It's this guy here. This synthetic layered fabric. So today, we're going to take a look at the actual maps for this fabric, and I'm going to show you how, going from the actual scan itself and how we can use our processing nodes, and we're going to create a material out of that here. So that's kind of what the substances look like here that are in Source. And so before we get started and jump right into Designer, one of the things that I want to talk about is a little bit about the process. And so here I have an image that's just up. It just kind of shows that we have a scan device, and from the scan device, we're going to output specific maps. So we've got like color map, normal map, and opacity. And the first step is, like I said here, to take these high quality pictures of the fabric we want to produce. Here, what we're using for these fabrics was the Visu scanner. And this step gets us these non-tileable, like I said, color, normal, and opacity. And then what we're going to do is we're going to process these maps using Substance Designer. So if we take a look at this second image, you can see here that we're going to have our input maps coming in from the scan. So that's going to be color, normal, opacity. Then what we're going to do is take these through a specific material crop filter, and what that's going to do is allow us to basically crop and fix the aspect ratio there of what the image is, and you'll see all that when we do the live demo. Then from there, we can run it through our auto tile node, which is going to allow us to create this material, take these scans, and then make these into a tileable material. And then from there, we'll go through some processing and cleaning. So for example, we may use the color match node to extrapolate color data out, correct it, or use it as what you'll see here in our live demo is to be able to colorize a fabric so we can have user input parameters. We'll take things, we'll derive things like curvature so that we can create roughness maps from that. So one question I think I see here in the chat is there a tutorial on scanning for roughness and specular layers? So what we're going to showcase here today is what we typically do is, especially like when we're using the scanner, is that, like I said, we're going to have color, normal, and opacity, and then we're going to use the normal color. We're going to use these maps and to derive other maps from them. Like, for example, we'll create height, we'll create ambient occlusion, but then we're also going to manually create our roughness from that. So we're not, right now we're not doing any delighting to where we're pulling out specular information, then using that directly. We're going to, for the most part, generate those maps here within Designer. So that's kind of what we're going to cover from there. So from the next stage of that, like I said, we're going to extrapolate these maps, and then we're going to be able to output those there from to the maps that we're going to use in source. And in that case, what we always output is either going to be, well, the source material actually covers both the metallic roughness and spec gloss workflow. Today, we're just going to look at just using base color and roughness. Okay, so now what we're going to do is just kind of jump right here into kind of a live demo of how this works. And so here I am inside of Substance Designer, and I'm going to show you how a lot of these scan processing nodes work. So if you haven't seen these before, if you come over here to the library here in Designer, underneath Material Filters, what you'll have here is scan processing underneath, like I said, material filters. And then here is all of the material filters that we have. And you'll see that we have some materials, like we have, material crop. And then here we have cloning tools. Some of the nodes are going to have like multi-angle support as well. So for example, you have multi-crop grayscale, and then we also have like multi-angle albedo. So some of the tutorials that we have on our website shows how we can, if you were to have a photograph, some type of material, whether it be like a fabric or something like that, from multi-angles, and you can take those different light angles and then combine those into, for example, like an albedo map or normal or something like that. So we have tutorials on our site that show that. What we're showing today, though, is not the multi-angle support, but just using the scan directly here inside of Designer. So, for example, like you can see, this is going to be the color map scan that we're going to be working with here. And so these are the nodes. You can check these out, explore them, kind of see what they're all about. And like I said, we do have some tutorials on Substance Academy that kind of go over this as well. So here, like I said, my resources, I have the color map. That's what I'm going to start with. And then here I have the normal map. And so here's what the normal map looks like here from the scan. And like I said, the spec and the rough, that's still going to be a manual process at this stage. So we're also just going to use just various nodes inside of Designer to kind of put all this together, as you'll see. Okay, so first thing we want to do here is we're going to work with our nodes here, our input map. So these maps that I have here in the resource, this is the raw map. So for example, you'll see here the resolution, it's like 6992 by 4536. This is the aspect ratio and the resolution. So when I take this node and I just drag and drop it here into a graph, you can see that it's going to crop it to, this square ratio. Now, just for demonstration purposes, just to try to keep the machine working kind of quick here, I have the base parameters, and I have this output size locked here to 2K. So just so everything is just a little snappier here as I work through the demo, instead of trying to work at 4 or 8K. And then I've done the same thing here with my normal. But what you'll notice here is that when we take a look at this node, because the aspect ratio has now been, it's going from something that's more wide like this here to something that's square, like 1-to-1, we now start to get some distortions here within these patterns. So we want to be able to work with the actual cropping and aspect ratio. And we have a node that's specific for handling that. So if we come in here and we come over to our crop, you can see here that we have this multi-crop node. Now we also have a material crop. What we're looking at here is multi-crop, two versions of that as well. So you have multi-crop and then multi-crop. Whoops, sorry about that. Got cut off. It's in here. Here, let's do this. Let's just search for crop. You can see this guy here is multi-crop grayscale. So we're going to be working with color. So that's what we're going to work with here, is the color version of this. All right, so let's just close up those base parameters. And if we come over here to this crop node, the first thing we want to work with is the input size. And what this is talking about is the input size from the raw image. Now, another question here that's being asked in the chat, is this taken from a photograph? What do you mean with scan? This particular this particular image that we're working with here, this was not a photograph. This was scanned using a machine called a Visu scanner. So what it is, it's just a machine. You put the fabric in, and then it's going to output specific types of maps. So for instance, what it outputs is color, normal, and opacity. Here today, we're not working with opacity, so I'm just working with the color and normal output from that. So it's coming from a machine, but it's not a photograph. If you're interested in working with photographs, just kind of go off on a little side tangent here. We do have tutorials on Academy that showcase how we can derive scans from photographs. I mean, you could do the same process I'm doing here as well. But if you check our blog, I believe it was early last year, maybe it had been December or November, we did a blog post on how to capture images using a camera that you can use for scan, specifically when using the scan processing nodes here in Designer. Okay, so we have this crop tool, and like I said, we want to work with our input size. So what we want to do is get the data from the actual source raw image. So like I said, that's going to be this 6992 by 4536. So let's come back here to this crop node, and here in the input X and Y, I'm just going to set these values in here. So we'll say 6992, and then I can just hit tab here to go to the Y, and then we'll type 4536 and hit enter. Okay, so that's going to set our input size. Whoops, didn't set that right. Let's do that one more time. Let's see here, 6992, and set this guy, 4536, he's good. Okay, so first thing for my input as well, I'm going to bring in this crop here. Oops, I'm using the crop, not the multi-crop. Sorry about this. We want to make sure we're using multi-crop here. So let's get rid of that node. Okay, so with multi-crop, we have an input count, and I do have 2 textures here. So I want to set this input count to 2, and that's going to give me these 2 inputs. Now, once again, I just have to go back and just set this up. So let me just come in here, set this guy. There we go. So that, again, that input size is coming from the pixel resolution from the actual source image itself. Okay, so now our output, I'm going to plug our color, which looks like this guy now. So we're going to plug that into input 1, and then we'll take our normal and plug that here into input 2. So now, if we take a look at this, you can see we have 3 outputs here. We have output 1, output 2, and area. One thing I want to talk about too with these outputs. So for example, here at the top of the bar, you can see that we have this creation mode. And so this is something we get questions a lot, and it can be confusing if you're new to Designer. So we have these 3 modes: standard, material, and compact. So if this was in compact material mode, you would see this as 2, so a scan and an area. So when something's in compact material mode, it'll basically take outputs that are linked to be a material. So in our case, we have these 2 images coming in, and these 2 images now are contained in this one single link creation output here. So that's what that's doing. If we look at this here in standard mode, we can see just the actual outputs, and we can make a connection individually with these outputs. So that's what's happening there. So output 1 is going to be the color, output 2 is going to be our normal, and then we have this area output, which allows us to see what this crop is doing. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm just going to try to expand my 2D view as much as I can. And using this area tool, you can see that here within this kind of square aspect ratio that we have, we can see the underlying raw source aspect ratio for the image. And then we have this square that allows us to set this cropping here. So I can, if I hold down Control and Alt, I can uniformly drag out kind of this cropping area that I want to choose for this material. So everything in this white area, I basically want to crop down to. And you'll also notice as I zoom in really close, the aspect ratio here is now correct. It's no longer squished as it was before. So now we're getting that aspect ratio. Because we're using multi-crop, we're taking these 2 inputs and we're cropping them using this same setting that we set here for this area. So now when we look at the actual crop itself, this is the base color, this is the normal. Both have the exact same crop mentioned, the exact same crop together. And so, that way we can do everything at once. Again, if we take a look at this, we now have the correct aspect ratio. So here, You can see where everything's kind of, squeezed or squished together horizontally like this. And then here we can see our aspect ratio is now set. So that's kind of our first stage. We're going to take our two inputs here and we're going to crop them together. Now, the next stage of this is we want to start to look at tiling. So here in my 2D view, if I just hit the space bar, this kind of lets me just view how this image is tiling in its current state. So you'll notice if I kind of mouse over into like the texture area, or if you look at it as a UV like 0 to 1, you get this little red box around it. That just indicates what our main texture area is, and everything outside of it's what's being tiled. So if we zoom in, you can see that, wow, we definitely have some seam problem issues with this guy. No problem though, we have specific tools here in Designer to work with this. So what we're going to do here, if we look over in our scan processing tools, we'll just scroll down here through our nodes, and let's see here. Here at the very bottom, we have the Smart Auto Tile node. So let's make an instance of this guy. So I'm just going to left click and drag and drop that here into my graph. Now this Smart Auto Tile, if we take a look at this guy here, you can see that it has some inputs here for base color, normal, and height. Now, in this particular case, I'm not working with height at this stage of the game. So I'm just going to turn that off so I don't have to worry about that input. Doesn't hurt if it's on. I just turned it off because it's just a little cleaner looking here. So now what we're going to do is take our output 1, which I know is my base color, and we'll plug that guy into there. And we're going to take our output 2, and we're going to plug that into our normal. So both of these guys are going to get tiled based on the settings that I choose for this Smart Auto Tile. So now we'll just kind of maximize here our 2D view, and let's zoom in and see what we have. So right off the bat, if I zoom in close, you can see, well, I'm getting some kind of weird artifacting. What's going on here? So let's take a look. Now, if you look at this for the edge settings, we've got a lot of control over how this Smart Auto Tile is going to work. So, I mean, in some cases, it could just be, we call it auto tile, you plug it in, and it depends on the input, but it could just, work out perfectly the first time. In cases like this, where you have very specific patterns, you're going to have to do some work here to get to it. But as you'll see, the node, it's pretty easy to use. So for example, you have this cut, offset, and threshold. So first thing I want to do is this detect edges. Notice that we're getting kind of this, kind of wavy line pattern like this. If I turn this off, you can see now what we get is just straight kind of cut lines. So this is like, if you've ever used Photoshop to try to make a tiling image, this is like if you go into that filter, offset, XY, and then you'd have to like clone out these lines and all that. That's kind of, if you could think about it, that's kind of where the stage we're at right now. But we have this detect edges algorithm that runs on this, and what it does is it takes that underlying image here and it tries to follow along kind of with these lines like this. And depending, like I said, on what the input coming in is that you could get a really awesome result automatically because you're not going to have like these perfectly straight lined edges here for your tiling. So here in this case, I'll just leave this on for now. I can also adjust like a threshold to this. So for example, if we start to just lower our threshold, the closer we get to 0, the more straight the lines get. So it's not really trying to pick up that underlying pattern here. So here you can see kind of whether you have this white and this blue, and we have these kind of, up and down kind of pattern like this. The detect edges is trying to mimic that pattern. And then we also have a blur here. So if I start to introduce a bit of blur to that, now you get something like this. So you can get an idea how that here in that case where we started to get that seam. So look here, if I set this here to 0, where it's trying to do this patch. So right in here you have the line, it's following that pattern. We put a little blur into this guy, and that seam kind of goes away. So you can see where this Smart Auto Tile is doing a lot of work right off the bat without much work at all. So here you get something like this. Now, what we want to do though is we want to make some adjustments because we're still getting issues like here and here, and if we look all the way over here, we're getting these types of issues here. So what I'm going to do in this particular case is I'm going to start to work with this kind of transform widget that I have here, and I'm going to start to just kind of offset things. So here we've got these points. I'm going to come over here to this middle point here on this side, and I can hold down the Alt key, and that's going to let me kind of skew this transform here. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Alt key, hold down the left mouse button, and I can start to click or or sorry, just drag downwards, and this is going to help me to kind of straighten up this pattern. So here, if I just undo that real quick, you can see like right now the whole pattern has this kind of diagonal tilt to everything. And if I want to straighten up this pattern here, what I'm going to do is just hold down the Alt key, like I said, drag down, and I'm just going to start to kind of straighten my pattern here. So I'm going to try to get something like maybe this here. Okay, so now I'm starting to straighten this up, still having some problems here, but we'll be able to fix that. So something else that you can adjust that can be helpful is this grid resolution. So it kind of it defaults to 9. And so depending on the pattern, you may need to actually change this grid resolution. So I think here, when I did some tests on this, if I set this to a grid resolution of around 4, it starts to set up a pretty good result here for me already. So just changing that grid pattern, I'm already starting to get a little bit of a better tile. However, I want to check it, so I'm going to hit space bar, and I'm going to take a look, and I'm still having some problems here. So what I'm going to do here at this stage is I'm going to hold down here my control key now and left click, and now I can start to just expand and change this pattern from this horizontal kind of standpoint here to start to try to fix this tile like this. And like I said, what I can do is just start messing around with this until I get this exactly the way I want. And I'll play around with it here just for a minute. I don't want to waste everybody's time too much. I've got one that I just did that's working pretty well, so I might just switch over to that in just a second. But let me check this here. We'll do something like this. So you can see here I'm just making some adjustments here just to line up my patterns. And this little transform tool is allowing me to do that. And I'm just trying to remember exactly which ways I went here. Like I said, it just took me a little bit to kind of play around with it. Okay, so just making these same adjustments that I'm doing right now. I've got another version here that I did just a little bit ago that I spent a little bit more time lining things up. So I'm just going to jump over to that instead of keep messing around with that guy. So here we'll go back here to our base color. And so here in this one you can see, oh, looks like I still had a little bit of a problem here. So let me just play around with that a little bit. Fix that guy on that side. Line that guy up here. So you can see, again, I'm just using that transform just to help me kind of line up my pattern, just to get it just right. When you have like a real complex pattern like this, like I said, so it can be a little tricky here to mess with it. But you can get pretty good results just using this tool. And I might shrink that in just a little bit. Okay. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. So that's going to give me my base color. And then this here is going to give it, also it's going to come in here and it's going to do that same cropping. So here you can see my seam here. It's going to do that same crop here on the normal as well as the base color. And then, like I said, I can also introduce a little bit of blur to that as well. Now, these cut lines that you get, like I said, if you think about using like the Photoshop filter where you're going offset X, Y, and you get these cut lines, what you can do is change the X and Y offset for these cut lines here. So you can see if I just, here, I'll do something rather large so you can see what it's actually doing. And so these are the cut lines that are showing up based on, you know, what these offsets are going to be for that. So here in this case, I'm just going to leave it over here at 0, 0. And then we'll get a tile pattern like this. Okay, so now we'll just move this over here, and I've got this mesh that I have here in my 3D view, and I've got my base color and normal output. So one thing I'm going to do just to kind of help visualize this, I kind of like to do this with all my materials, is I'm just going to quickly create a base material node. And for this guy, for the preset, I'm going to set this to be a dielectric material. And for now, I'm just going to set the roughness to be pretty high. And then I just right-click and drag that and drop that right here into my 3D view. So now all of my material is being driven here off this base material and whatever settings or whatever type of inputs I plug into this. So I don't have to worry about creating outputs and all that. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to create a base color input and a normal input on this guy, and then just drag these into here like this and like this. And so now we can get just a quick idea of what this material is doing here on an actual mesh. Let's come over here to our materials. And for the definitions, physically based, metal rough, you can see I'm using the tessellation shader. And then here I'm just going to click the edit button, and this is going to let me adjust things like my scale. We don't have any height at this time, so we won't do that for now. But I might want to adjust my tiling. So here I'll just set this at 2. And so now I'm just tiling this material. So now you can see what it's doing here on this mesh. Let's see. So for now, we'll just leave it here at 1 so we can see these details up close as we start to work. All right, so this is our base material here. And what we've done is we take our source, we've cropped them, we've tiled them, and then here we have our base material that we're doing an output for that. So the next thing I want to do is start to extrapolate some of my different maps. So one thing that we could do here, once we've done the tiling fix for this, so we've used the auto tile to kind of set this up, if you had any cleaning that you needed to do within this. So let's say, for example, I wanted to do some clone patching. So here, let's do this. Let's just look at it over here in the actual library. So here you can see that we have clone patch here. So I'm just going to make an instance of this node. And so we have clone patch. And then here we also have material clone patch. So in this case, let's use this one here since we have a material at this stage. Actually, all we really have so far is just our base color and our normal. But what you would do here at this point is we could maybe do this closer to the end. But for example, just to give you an idea of how this works, this particular material, you can see it's actually already pretty clean. So I don't need to worry about cloning anything. But I just want to show you how this works. So I'm just going to take the base color and plug it into here. And then I can look at my output here. For this node, and this is going to show me what the source and target areas are. So here underneath, once this node, when I'm viewing these area outputs, you'll see that we have this little drop down. So what I can do is grab the source. So this is going to be like the area that I want to clone. And then here, let's just zoom in. Let's focus on this 2D view pretty good. Zoom in pretty close. So this is, like I said, going to be my source. And then here you can see where now the target is basically cloning from what we have underneath the source, and it's cloning that here to the target area. And if we need to adjust the target area, we just choose the target, and then from there we can move the target. Also, we can adjust things like our threshold. We can blur and adjust smoothness, adjust our grid resolution, and so on. So if I up this grid resolution, let's drop, increase our threshold here, drop our blur and smoothness and things like that. So we can get, now we're getting a little bit of a harder edge on this here. So now we'll just blur that edge and so on. So this is how you could do some cloning if you needed to, remove any type, maybe there was some type of stain or some dirt or something like that that you wanted to get, that you wanted to clean up or whatever from there. All right, so that's our clone patch. In this particular material, we didn't have to use it, but I just wanted to let you know that it was there in case you haven't seen these tools before. Okay, so now I'm at the stage where I need to start kind of extrapolating just more map types from this. So first thing, I'm just going to grab a height. So if I start to type in normal, you can see that we have a node here called the normal to height high quality. So I'm going to use this guy here. And I'm going to take my normal output and plug it in. And then here we get a height map instantly from that. And then we have the ability to adjust our relief balance and so on. So what I want to do with this guy is for the relief balance, I like to just blur it just a bit. If I'm using this for displacement, I kind of like the height to basically encompass the overall silhouette of what the shapes are. And then a lot of that high frequency detail is going to be is coming from the normal. So that's just one way to work in this case. So I might adjust my relief balance. I can also choose to just do a height, normalize the height by just enabling this to true. So that just normalizes, and then I'm going to adjust my relief balance and so on. So here you can see what you're getting. We can also adjust our height intensity. So I might use something like that here. So now we get our normal to height. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is extrapolate some ambient occlusion. So again, I'll hit the space bar. I'll start to type in ambient occlusion, and here we have this ambient occlusion node. Now this node is a really, really powerful node, and it's a horizon-based ambient occlusion node. And so here, what it does is it takes our height map as an input, and then it generates ambient occlusion from that. Now, when you're working with scans, in particular, there is a setting for this called Use World Units. And if I enable that, we can actually set the surface size and the height scale in centimeters here. Now, I didn't scan this, so I don't actually know what the surface size is. So I'm not going to be able to set that exactly. But say if you were scanning this, placing this into the view, you would know what the sample of the size would be. So you could just enter that value here in centimeters. In my case, I'm just going to disable it and just kind of, use my eye to adjust my height depth and my radius here. So I'll do something like this. Let's see, just make a few adjustments. Maybe I'll use this here for my ambient occlusion. But you can see the detail that you can get from this ambient occlusion node. It's really, really a good node. All right, so now that I have a new map type, let's just feed that into our base material. So here we'll expand our 3D view so we can see that. Let's enable ambient occlusion. Let's grab our node here, our output, and plug that in. And so now we have some ambient occlusion data into here. Okay, and like I said, if we need to make any adjustments to that, we can do so just by, changing our height depth. So here I just increased it a little bit more so, it's a little bit more contrasty in this case so we can see it maybe a little better in the stream. All right, so now we have our ambient occlusion for us working here. Let's see, the next thing that we want to do is work on our roughness. So like I said, with the scan, we're not going to be pulling the specular information off. We don't have a delighting tool that we're working with at this time. So what we typically do is we're going to manually generate this data for us. And if you check out what we have in the blog post, typically, one of the ways we can do that is just pull curvature information and use that to create some roughness. And as you can see here, it's going to be a pretty simple process. So what I'm going to do here is just use our curvature node, and the curvature just takes our normal map as input. So we'll do that. Let me just organize these guys. These are going to be all my map extraction stuff here. And so now we have this curvature. And with this guy here, what I like to do is I'm going to come over and then I'm going to use a histogram range node right after this. So we'll plug this histogram range node in, and if I set the range all the way up to 1, you're going to get the exact input value as the output at this stage. So we've got range at 1 and position at 0.5. But what's nice about this node is I can use this position to help me create an input parameter here for roughness. So as you can see, if I start to pull this down towards 0, we still have detail here in this rough information, but it's getting darker. So when using the metallic roughness workflow, this is going to be more of a glossy result. Whereas if we pull this closer to a value, something closer to 1, we start to get more of an overall white here, which is going to denote more roughness. But yet we still have some nice detail in here as well. So I'm just going to use this information here to just generate my roughness. And like I said, what I could do, I'll come in and expose this. I'm going to give this a new name, and I'm just going to call this roughness. Oh, here, rough amount. And now if we look here at the root level of my graph, I'm going to have, let's see, we'll call this roughness. I'm now going to have this user parameter that I can use to change the value for roughness depending on, different scenarios and things. Okay, so now that we have this, I'm going to enable my roughness channel here. I'm going to take my roughness information and plug that in. And so here, if we come back to our range tool, actually let's go to our root level since we've exposed that. If I lower this value here, you'll start to see that now we're getting, a little bit more of a kind of a gloss sheen here on this. It's not really what I want for this fabric, so I'm just going to move this up to a little higher value like this. I don't know, let's try 0.65. Okay, so that's just another way that, we could extrapolate out our roughness information like that. Okay, so another thing that we can do here is, well, I'll tell you what. Once I kind of have this in place, you can just right-click on this node here, And just kind of a shortcut, we can create output nodes. Ask if I want to use any hidden connectors. What this is talking about is this node supports the specular glossiness workflow as well. I'm not using that, so I'm just going to say no. And it will automatically generate all my outputs for me. So now if I just right-click and view outputs in 3D view, I'm going to view these outputs now instead of just viewing this base material. And so with that, what I want to do is I'm going to hit my space bar here, grab my output node, and I'm going to create another output for this that's going to be my specular level. So we start to type this, and you can see it automatically shows up. What I do for these outputs, I'll just select this this usage information. I'll come over here to the identifier and I just paste it in, and then I paste it for the level. All right, so what does this guy do? All right, the specular level is specific to the metallic roughness workflow, which is what I have here. Now, just a little bit on PBR, if you're not familiar with it, when you use the metallic roughness workflow, the dielectric F0, or that's the Fresnel 0 reflectivity point, is hard-coded in the shader to be 4% reflective. So with metallic roughness, you do not have a map that you set, like a specular map that you set so that you can change what that dielectric F0 value is going to be. It's hard-coded, like I said, at 4%. So some shaders will give you an input that allows you to override that 4% value. So for example, here in Substance Designer, that input is called Specular Level. If you're using Unreal Engine does not support spec gloss at all, so it's only metallic roughness. And if you look at the Unreal Engine material editor, there's a specular input, and that specular input is exactly what I'm going to be showcasing here. So what I can do here at this point is just input in a value. So I'm going to do a uniform color here, and I'm going to set it to grayscale. And then here, I'm just going to set the value to 0.5. Okay, and then I'm going to plug that right there into the specular level input. And then I'm just going to right-click and view my outputs in 3D view. Now, you'll see absolutely nothing changes. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm setting the basics here for the ability to override this. Now, when I said that specular level is controlling that hard-coded value there inside of the shader. So what happens is on the metallic roughness, 4% at the Fresnel 0 angle is what's reflected back to us, okay? And what we do in our shader is we remap a value from 0 to 0.08. Now, 0.08 is linear for 8% reflective. So if we look at this specular level control, in the dark area, it's going to be 0, and at the white area, it's going to represent 8% reflective. And so that value is remapped 0 to 1. So at a value of 1, you're 8% reflective. At a value of 0, you're 0. And at a value of 0.5, 0 and 8, the middle of that, 0.5 is 4. So when I set this value to 0.5, I'm really just using that same 4% reflective value for this dielectric. And in most cases, that's good enough. That works fine. But like I said, if you need to override it, especially when working with textiles and things like that, if you need to be able to overwrite that, you now have the ability to do that using that specular level. So for example, if I start to move this to like something like 0.3, it's a very subtle change, but it's now we're less than 4%. Or if we go above that, we're higher than 4%. And so, different materials could have a variance on that F0 value. And so what we have here in the shader is just the ability for you to change that if you want to. The big takeaway from that is that 0 to 8% is remapped to 0 to 1. So in order to get the correct results, you need to input a float that's going to go from 0 to 1, where 0.5 is 4%. If you're using Unreal Engine with Substance, that specular channel in the Unreal Engine material is doing the exact same thing. It's remapping 0 and 8% reflective to 0 to 1, and a 0.5 means 4%. So sorry, the long-winded explanation there, but just in case anyone's listening who hasn't seen or know what that's for, it's very, very specific to the metallic roughness output. If you're using spec gloss, you can actually author the dielectric F0 right there in the specular map. Okay, so here we were able to use that specular level, and we're starting to build up our material. So we have a material here, but we want to, like I said, we want to start having like user parameters, because that's really what the substance is all about. You know, we were able to take some scan data. We were able to we were able to go in and, tile it. We were starting to extrapolate maps. We want to be able to change colors and do things like that, and we'll do that. A few questions I see coming up in the stream about high pass and things like that. We do have tools for that as well. We have high pass filters. Another thing that you can do that I kind of wanted to showcase here as well. Let's see. We have a color equalizer. So depending on the scan itself too, this one is pretty uniform already. But let's say that maybe if you're using a photograph, or if you look at the scan itself and there's some discrepancy in the shadowing going across the surface. So like maybe it's darker over here, brighter in the middle, and so on. And if you need to kind of equalize all that, you can use our color equalizer. So if we plug this guy here into the color equalizer, you can see that I have the ability to change a balance between my bright and dark balance. I can set up a custom color variation here where I can change hue, chroma, and lumina, and so on, and then also adjust my radius. Now, in this particular map, it's already balanced enough, so it's not really useful. So that's why I didn't use it so far in the stream, but I saw some comments there. I just wanted to bring this up in case, again, people are watching, they haven't seen that before. So it's another node in the arsenal there. Highly recommend for you to just run through the scan processing nodes and just take a look at what's available in here as well. Okay, so like I said, the next stage of this is we want to start to look at colorizing this, because this is a substance that we want to be able to have user-driven parameters and things like that. So the next part of this is I'm going to start to look at making some color changes. And so we have a node that's really good at helping me to do this, and that's going to be our color match node. Again, can be found here in the scan processing nodes. So let me just look and see where this guy is. Actually, I might be lying. It's not in here. I typically don't use this. I kind of always just do a search for things. I find that just to be a little quicker. If you're new to Designer, it's always best to kind of just start here so you can get an idea of what's here. But once you know what's here, you just start searching, and here's color match. Okay, so color match. This is what we want to do. Now, let's say that we want to take this base color and we want to colorize this guy. So what we're going to do is just grab that base color output, plug it into color match. Then here you have this source color mode. We have a couple options. We have average, parameter, and input. So it defaults to average, and what that's doing is it's taking the the median value, which is going to be this blue, since that's what's the main. If the overall kind of median of the color input coming in is going to be this blue, and it's going to take that average and then it's going to change it to whatever this target color is going to be. So for example, let's say that I want to make this green. I can just click green for the target color. Now I'm changing it. Like this. You also have the ability to look at this mask output to see what's being generated here. So if I look, I can see, well, it did an okay job to start, but I'm starting to get, some speckling and things like that. So maybe what I want to be able to do is start to adjust maybe some things like my hue range, the chroma range to this, and so on. So you can see that maybe I can try to get some of these values. Here I'm going to adjust my luma range to kind of get rid of some of that, and then add just a little bit of blur to it like this. So now I'm getting a pretty clean mask, and if we take a look at our output, we're getting something like this. And then again, I might want to start to adjust some more of these settings in here to make sure that I just get everything the way I need it to be. So this is one way of just using that average median value of that color. Another way that we can work with this is to use a parameter. So parameter now gives me like a color picker. So what we have here is source color and target color. And so here, if I just do a color pick, I can choose, this blue value here. And now I can, adjust my target color. Again, I can go in and take a look at my mask to start to go through and derive, different settings and values like that to get exactly what I want to do here for, how I'm going to generate that mask with that in that particular case. So here we might use something like this color mask. Let's see. We'll do something like this here. Question, is that color match available in the scan processing group? I don't think it is in there. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly where it is in the library. But like I said, if you just hit spacebar and start to type in color, you'll see it shows up right here at almost the very top. So it's just a quick way to get to it. So here we're going to do our color match. Let's do another color match in here. So we'll just create another instance of this node. So whoops, here's color match. Here I'm going to grab my base color and plug that into here. Whoops. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, let's see here. Let's try to target kind of the white areas of this. So here I'm going to set this to a parameter, and I'm going to do my source and choose white. Let's take a look at our mask, and then we'll just mess around with some of these values here until we can actually get what it is we need to get for this mask. So here I'm going to adjust my hue range. A little bit of setting here on this chroma and then luma, and then we're going to blur this a little bit here. Okay, and then for this target color, maybe we'll do something like kind of like a red value like this. So now we're just targeting different areas. Here I'm just going to do a blend. We'll plug these guys into here. Now I need a mask for this blend, so here you can see that the node gives me a specific mask output, so I can just plug that into the opacity to get kind of a colorization here for this. And then, like I said, you can go through and start to just tweak these values until you get the exact result that you need here for this. Let's see, we'll do blur and also adjust kind of my smoothness value here. So this lets us just kind of colorize this texture. Again, we'll just plug this here to our base color. And now we're going to get, a different result here for our material. So in this stage, what we could do is then come back and we could expose this target color value so that you have a user-driven parameter here for this substance, so that you have these parameters. So you can easily change the material. So we started, from this material here. This is what we had by default. And then we did one variation where we had something like this here. And we're able just to kind of colorize that fabric. And again, like I said, you can set this up to have just as many as you want through that. Okay, so that's pretty much going to close out kind of everything that I want to show here in then today's webinar. So the big takeaway is that today we dropped 30 of these textile materials geared around sportswear fabrics. They're available on Substance Source now. We have a new blog post, so if you haven't seen that, check that out. We have some more information about the scanning process. Here, always take a look at the scan processing nodes that we have here in Designer. Like I said, this has just kind of been a really basic walkthrough on how these nodes are used. But the Substance Source team who is creating all of these assets, they're using these same tools. They're using Designer to create the assets that we place there on Source. And so, like I said earlier, not to make light of what they do, because they do amazing work. Those guys are texturing wizards. And so, it takes them not too long to do it. They obviously have more care in what I'm doing here, but as you can see, using these nodes, you can get a tileable material pretty quickly here in Designer. And the idea behind these nodes was, we looked at all of these different scenarios where, people were hand processing these scans in Photoshop, and we looked at all of the minute things they were having to do. So we tried to take Designer and create nodes that just help speed up that process. Again, so the whole idea being to enhance productivity so you can get the scans in, use them, create the materials you need, and then get them out as quickly as possible. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us here today. Just always stay tuned to our Twitter, our Facebook, so when we have new webinars coming up, we'll communicate those. And also let us know if you have any suggestions, if you need any help. We're all here in the forums, so if you have any questions about what you saw today, just jump in the forums, let us know. I'd be happy to help. So thanks a lot, everybody, and we will see you next time.